Great. All right. Well, welcome everyone. You are officially finished with week one of the class. Yay! So you're like 20%, through the class already. It's pretty like not so bad, right? But going by pretty fast. Okay. So I've got three of you here right now. One more maybe joining. Mary's going to watch this back. But let's go ahead and start. Shannon, since you weren't here last week, why don't you introduce yourself real quick? Hopefully you watched the video so you saw everybody else's introductions.
I did. I watched the video and it was great. And so I am a professional horse person. I've teach, train, run horse shows. I do a lot of body work now and trim hooves. And so pretty much do a lot of different things.
Mm.
So I've always been fairly introverted, always had difficulty with boundaries. So I thought this would be a great course to take. And watching that video on the module one,
Oh, yeah.
whatever. Yeah. So it really resonated me with the person who like says, yeah, I'll just won't put myself out there.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
me.
Very common.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Shannon, where are you in the country? So
Oh,
everybody,
I live in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. So about an hour west of DC.
great. And
It's not too far.
Not bad.
I was lucky enough to meet two of your horses when you came down for a clinic here, but why don't you tell everyone else just quickly, do you have just the two horses
I
or?
have just the two at this point. I have a 10-year-old Oldenburg named Sachio who has been teaching me how to accept his no and work through that and figure out if we could find a mutual yes.
Yeah.
And the young horse who is 5 and just giving him time to grow up. So we're just doing fun things, but not doing anything difficult or hard or much riding at all, really. Um, he's a character. He's a lot of fun. Super smart, super curious. Yeah, very different horses.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Great. Thank you, Shannon.
sure.
So glad you're here. So I wanted to start with just a little kind of recap of week one, and you watched it, but it doesn't hurt to hear it again, right? So the primary purpose of boundaries, I had three that I introduced in the very first lesson, which is to define where we end and others begin. Very simple, not always easy, but very simple concept. Also to protect us from unwanted, damaging, or unhealthy energies and behaviors that come from the outside world. So it could be from other people or situations. And then the third is to protect others from unwanted, damaging, or unhealthy energies and behaviors that are emanating from us, right? And that's one thing that I think I hear boundaries talked about publicly a lot, very rarely is it about that last one, which is the containment boundaries, right? But you really can't, I don't think we can have a comprehensive understanding or even be able to work very functionally with boundaries unless we understand that there's both kinds and that we need to be engaged with and playing with both kinds and aware of them. So when we talk about containment boundaries and this protecting someone, protecting others from like our unhealthy energies or behaviors, the question that we really have to answer is like unhealthy for whom, right? And it's always going to be the recipient. Okay. So boundaries are always about how the energy feels to someone who's receiving the energy, right? And only the person or horse or any being who's receiving energy can determine whether those energies are helpful, neutral, or hurtful to them in the moment, right? It doesn't mean that a behavior is always helpful or always hurtful in that situation, in that moment for that person or that being is what we're determining it is. This is something that we tend to want to do is just judge certain behaviors as harmful or certain energies as harmful or unfair. And that's not necessarily true because sometimes those energies might be fine to someone. At other times, they may not be. So unhealthy is determined by the recipient, right? The person who's feeling like there needs to be a boundary there of some sort. So that just means that one person can have the very best of intentions, or we can have the very best of intentions with our horses as well. And the other person or the horse can still receive those intentions and energy or behavior that goes with them as offensive, harmful, or unsafe. So does that make sense? Yeah. So this is a really, really important thing to keep in mind. It's not necessarily our intentions or how we want something to come across. It's how is it received by the other person. And the same if someone is interacting with us, they may have certain intentions around that, but what really matters to us anyway is how it feels to us, right? And the receiving end of it. So I don't want you to race too far ahead in your mind with that, because that can take us quickly to like, how do we figure out these solutions if my intentions are this, but that's not how it's being received. So don't go there yet. For right now, I just want you to be able to sit with this, really deep realization and the complexity of that, and just hold the possibility, that both things can be true at the same time. Someone's intentions could be good, but the recipient may not receive it that way. There also can be situations where someone's intentions may not be that good, but it's perfectly fine for the person who receives it, right? Or it rolls right off of them, or it doesn't affect them badly. So there's two separate things, intentions and how something is received. So we have to be able to hold all that complexity. So that's the practice for right now, is just that expanded awareness, right? Yeah, and so even I encourage you, like, just right now, take a deep breath. You can close your eyes, take a couple deep breaths, and just lean into that complexity. Whew. And probably, let go of in your energy, like all those times that maybe you had good intentions, but they weren't received that way. Just let that go. And same thing with if people maybe hurt us, but didn't necessarily have that intention to. Like, let's just let that go for a second. Okay. So then the next lesson after the introductory one, and we're going to come back to containment boundaries and all of these complexities at different layers as we go along in the modules. So this module 1 was just about the awareness of that. And then the reading for this month, or this week, was my chapter from my book on boundaries are designed to be flexible. And although we didn't have a horse behavior video this week, we did have the story about Shoki and Marcus, if you read that story. And I was curious if there was anything that stood out for you about that story, or anything about that whole chapter about boundaries being flexible and the idea of bubbles instead of walls. Any comments about that? Was it all pretty, anything new there, or was it pretty things you knew already?
The bubbles is something that Linda Kahanov talks about when we're doing work
Yes.
with the horses and the pens, and watching for those different levels of boundaries.
Exactly. And she was the one who coined that boundary dance, which I just love.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. I love the way she talks about boundaries with horses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah,
else?
I guess the one that occurred to me is when my horse is out with two ponies, and they're usually not interacting much with each other, and I haven't really been able to see. And it's I guess that's true. It's not just my horse. It's anytime I've tried to practice seeing their dance, I I don't see it. And I don't know if they're just out there hanging out. I don't really see all of these. And I've been a member of the Horse Beat Club since its beginning, and I still, have a hard time by myself seeing these things. So I don't know if it's,
Mm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
a great.
don't know if they're just not doing anything at the time, or if they're so subtle I'm missing it.
So my guess would be it's the second, although there are definitely
Oh,
scenarios.
I can see, yeah.
What was that?
The blow-ups, when
Blow-ups.
the boundary is crossed, but usually they're just like far enough away that they're not even
Yeah.
bothered by
So
it.
part of the practice, and maybe this will help, maybe it won't. And sometimes some people are more visual than others, right? So I'm
Not
having
very.
lots of
Ask
different.
me what I wore yesterday. I don't
You
know.
don't know. Yeah. So I try to have different kinds of exercises and different kinds of learning for different styles in the module. So there may be each week, there may be some things that really resonate for you, and there may be some things that don't, and that is okay. But another thing to think about possibly when you are watching the horses, we tend to focus on the horses themselves. And I find it sometimes very helpful to focus on the space between. Whether you think of it as bubbles or not, is just think of the space as tangible, right? And see if you can just feel into whether the horses are noticing the space between each other. And if they're not doing anything, then maybe that the space between feels comfortable to them, or if they're not having any obvious conversation. So you could start with that very basic thing of just playing with looking at the horses and looking at the space, right?
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I'll
Just
be right back.
different things to play with.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So then the practice for this week was kind of based in noticing our emotions as boundary signals or warning signals. And then I actually asked you to practice with some of that. So before I get into asking you about your practice, I thought I'd give you an example of something that happened to me this week. And this is also to say that it doesn't matter how long you're working on boundaries, this is a lifelong practice. So I stressed that last week. I want to stress it again. This is an introductory course. It introduces concepts. It's going to get you to start practicing. But boundary work is not something that we do once or we take one class on and then like we're great at it for the rest of our lives, right? This is definitely a lifelong practice and you will get more fluent in it, but there's always going to be things that are challenging. And certainly if we have patterns of behavior that started when we were young, that we've grown up with, if you are, again, like I grew up, a people pleaser, right? A fixer, if you have codependency issues, or whatever way it goes, whatever your patterns are, those are likely to always be with us. It's kind of based in our core beliefs about the world that may not be beliefs that we chose to have, but they're the beliefs that our young subconscious mind, embraced because that was how the world made sense to us when we were children, right? Or that's what worked for us when we were children. So these core beliefs they stay with us, and they're often like our first reaction to things, right? But what boundary work is partly about is self-awareness and learning to play with those. Like we don't have to be defined by those anymore. We don't have to be a victim to them. They don't have to control us, but we have to be conscious of them. So for me, definitely was a codependent, definitely a people pleaser. I call myself recovering people pleaser because I don't think we ever are completely recovered from that. And that played out for me a lot of times, still does, as wanting to fix things for people I care about, right? When they're going through hard times or having struggles, or a horse, I want to fix it for them, right? I want to be able to make it better. Anybody else relate to that? Some nods. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I think we're all kind of in that same boat. So this week, I definitely had, the first thing was, I had actually two different situations with two different people who I care about who were going through some really tough things this week. Won't go into details about any of it, but what I found myself feeling was very anxious, concerned, edgy, and worried. So those were the four that I could really identify that I was feeling, and that it was in response to what was happening with these other individuals in my life. So for me, what that signified was that I was starting to fall into my unhealthy and codependent patterns of people pleasing and wanting to fix someone else's problems. So when I feel emotionally compelled or driven to fix other people's problems, this represents, actually going back to containment boundaries, usually a lack of containment boundaries on my part. Now that's an interesting thing to say, right? Because, one thing to think about is that even when we are trying to be very helpful or want to be helpful, if we are offering someone advice they haven't asked for, if we are offering someone help they haven't asked for, this can be a boundary violation. Not always, like, right? Some situations, there's some people who don't know how to ask for help and like to receive help even when they haven't asked for it. But we need to know if someone hasn't asked us for help, that could be a boundary violation to step in and try to help, right? What we should do is ask, would you like help with that? Or can I offer a suggestion, right? See if they're open to it. Would be a nice way to find out whether we might be violating boundaries. Or if we put it out there, but we've sensed that it's not received very well, instead of taking that personally, we might need to understand I'm falling into my really people pleasing, like fixing, wanting to help pattern, and the other person may not be in a place right now to be able to receive that. All right. In one of the situations, I kind of got the pushback. The other situation, the help I offered was politely received, well received, but that was just two different situations. But I was able to sit back and understand what was going on from my own experience, right? And those feelings I had of feeling anxious, concerned, edgy, and worried. Both situations, the person was actually okay, right? Physically, they were safe. There wasn't anything, they weren't in emergency crisis at the time that I was interacting with them or talking with them. So all of that edginess and worry and concern wasn't about anything like life. Nobody was in immediate danger that I needed to take some like emergency action on, if that makes sense, right? So it can be extremely uncomfortable for me, to speak to myself personally, to witness when those I care about are sitting in their own discomfort, right? If they're struggling with something, that can be very uncomfortable for me. And the first thing I want to do right away is like jump in and help and make it easier for them, especially if I think I know something that might be helpful. And I'm not saying we should never do that. I'm just saying we should be conscious of what's driving it, right? And we can sometimes disempower someone if we jump in too much and try to help too much. And maybe what they really need is to be able to work through this situation themselves. Maybe they just needed us to listen. Maybe they just needed us to know what had happened, right? Maybe they just need to vent, whatever. Whenever someone, we all have friends who call us and vent. It's very challenging for me to listen to someone venting and not want to try to fix what they're talking to me about, right? So this is just me. I have to realize that those situations, I really have to play with my own containment boundaries in those situations and realize like, what are the emotions I'm feeling? Why do I want to fix this? Because I want to feel better, right? Or I want to feel helpful, whatever, right? There's lots of compelling reasons that are my own inside there. So this was just an opportunity for me to notice, okay, I still have a lot of this to play with, right? I'm much better at it than I used to be, but it still brings up a lot of those things for me. So what can happen that's dangerous from a boundary perspective, if I don't have those containment boundaries, right? Or if the other person doesn't tell me back off, right? The other person could have a boundary and just tell me, no, thanks, I don't need that help, or thank you so much, let it go. That would be them putting up a boundary that lets me off the hook. That's actually sometimes more comfortable for me because I don't have to regulate myself then, right? Oh, they told me they don't want my help. I can let myself off the hook. I can go on about my business. It's harder when the other person doesn't put up a boundary, right? And what happens then is I can lose myself, right, in the situation or fall into the trap of believing that someone else's problems are the cause of my discomfort, right? If I give advice and they don't take it and then it's not getting better and like, right, I get all entwined in that situation. So that's my own unhealthy patterns that are actually causing me discomfort and may or may not be helping the other person at all. Does that make sense? Right. This is layered, complicated, just using it as an example of where I am with my boundary work. And since you all were doing the homework, I was like, let me notice what I had this week. That was what I had this week, right? Practice with being able to have containment boundaries and or ask whether the person needed help and what kind of help from me. And, I've done this over the years too. And honestly, the thing someone most often tells me if I actually do ask them is they just want me to listen. A lot of times, if you listen, they'll figure out their answers for themselves too, right? Or just need to be heard. But I have to stop my compulsion of wanting to help or drop everything and actually go help, right? Yeah. But it's perfect to ask. It's perfectly okay to ask and offer to help if you're comfortable doing that. You also shouldn't feel compelled to help when you really don't have the time or energy or space, right? So that's another kind of boundary in that situation. So that was my example for this week. I'd love to hear did any of the rest of you get to practice with the homework at all? Yeah, Colleen?
Yes, I
How about
did.
you?
Yeah, so I had a lot of well, when I started journaling about it, and it took me the realization that I was procrastinating about the journaling
Yeah.
to realize like how intense it was. A sense of overwhelm, sadness, like it just and as I journaled about it, it was that idea of um that I don't feel I have control over it, right? I feel like it's this thing that's happening or that I've tried and haven't had a result. And I think what I love about what you're talking about is the containment of uh, what feels like things that are being intentionally done to me
Mm.
are not. It's my story in my head of why it's all happening.
Mm.
Um, and there's a lot of layers to it, but to give an idea of, for instance, I had some scheduling software issues happen. And
Okay.
so I feel like I have been playing catch up on my calendar. Um, and I felt really good yesterday. Like I finally got back on the ball because I had a horse show with students on Saturday and then ended up in the ER with my dog all night after the
Oh,
horse show. And everything worked out, but it was like, Sunday was Father's Day. And then by the time I got up from being in the hospital with the dog, my husband got called into work.
oh,
So it was like this series of like all these scheduling things that there's nothing I could have done. But then yesterday when I had students asking about getting in or, doing something else, then I felt like offended, like I am doing everything I can to just get back on track today.
yeah.
And taking like that overwhelm, that sadness, that like, "Oh, I couldn't fix this or why couldn't I get the software to do this for me?" Um, and then like the idea of like taking it personal that people because this is not the intention, they really just want to work with me, right? And that's a blessing, that's a wonderful thing. um Something as simple as my daughter's softball game, like I had it all timed out yesterday when I was getting back on track and getting the house under wraps and did something fun with the kids, and we got to the softball field and that's when I realized that it was canceled. There's
Oh,
no one there, and it was just that there's a different app, right? It's not a text, it's a different app for the sports.
oh,
And I didn't get the message at 3:30. So at, 5:15, we're there and ready for practice and the game had been canceled.
wow. Wow.
So
Yeah.
anyway, just that cycle of like, it was a series of events that were completely unrelated, but it put me in that place of like, I just can't change it and I want to give up and I'm tired of pulling everybody along and it
Mm.
was so not the story, it's not the truth. And then realizing like how much of it, like it all went well. Like I was proud of myself that, the kids still, we paused and they played on the playground where the softball field was and we went back to get some ice cream before we went home. And
Yeah.
then my husband was home from work a little bit earlier. So it was like afterwards when I kind of let it go,
It was okay.
everything kind of fell into place and it was all okay. But there was a moment of like, how did I let this happen?
Mm.
And being, taking things personally or being annoyed with it. And anyway, recognizing that so that coming into today, I didn't get overwhelmed because, my mother-in-law had asked for me to work with the computer or I don't know, just little things that I wouldn't normally have in the schedule that I kind of squeezed in,
Yeah.
um, that I could be kind with her and not reflect that, uh, the untrue story of like people don't value my time,
Mm.
Right.
if that makes sense. I'm sorry. I know I kind of went all over the place there, but
No, actually, that was beautiful. And yes, I love that you're pinpointing it into the story that you start to tell yourself, which I heard one is like other people don't value my time, right? Or everything is
Mhm,
trying to get a piece of my time, right?
mhm,
Or also you said nobody's intention, right, was to they want to work with you. That's a good intention, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
this way that you're already feeling about not being in control. Oh, the other was I felt like, even though you didn't say it, there might have been a little judgment on yourself of like, how did I miss that on the app? Right?
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Definitely judgment
Yeah.
of,
How did I miss that? And then on the flip side, I'm sorry, before I forget, the idea of, yeah, they want to work with me, right? But me feeling like there's nothing more to give, right?
Mhm.
Like, and then that makes me go back into that like shame spiral of like, I used to work so many more hours and I used to be able to, but in reality, like I've got 27 like regular students and there's a wide variety of schedules and the kids are home from school and like just that reality of like where we are in the show season. So there's so many variables that
Yes.
play into that, but that I don't need to shame myself. Um, yeah, that I missed the message in the app or that I couldn't get somebody in that's been wanting to get in.
Absolutely. And that shaming yourself doesn't help anything, right?
Mm-mm.
It's going to just take you deeper into the cycle. And then you're going to carry that into like your next interaction and your next interaction. What I love too is that you were able to, one, say, okay, this is where we are. There's no practice, but we're here. Let's just use play here or whatever, right? And so you were able to kind of ease into that, let it turn into there's a opportunity, I guess, is what I like to say. An
Yeah.
opportunity within a problem, right? Being able to see that, go with the flow a little bit, and then later you kind of took the bigger perspective on it so that you didn't come into today already feeling all those emotions, right? That
Mm-hmm.
are warning trigger emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess I'm a little curious more, how did you what helped you let those feelings go or switch those?
Good question. Um, First recognizing what was within my control and what was not.
Yes.
Like I had there was no way I could have changed certain scenarios. Um, and then the other piece that like is specific that pops into my mind is um, like an hour before my first lesson this morning, I got a text that she wasn't going to be able to come, but she was willing to say like, I can't be there, but you could still work with my horse or we could reschedule. I was able to say like, which I don't usually I'm like, okay, I need to answer her now. I was able to say like right now I'm working on my mother-in-law's computer and I'll be able to answer that in, the next hour.
Yes. Yes. Right.
And yep, so that was big for me. Like I'll be able to tell you what's best without me having some like snarky like that's 24-hour cancellation or like whatever.
Right. Right.
Um and then the funny thing about that was that it's like that oh gosh, when I let that go and I finished everything with my mother-in-law instead of jumping track,
Mm.
um the next email that came in was that my Thursday 10 a.m. had canceled so I could move her into that spot. And again, it was something that I actually knew enough in advance, and it was someone else who was sick. Anyway, point being is it all fell into place when I just let it go.
Woo! Like that's super powerful right there. And I can't tell you how many times that kind of stuff happens
Yeah.
where I just give it a minute, let myself like not react, not make a rash judgment based in reactivity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Either that or you would have had time to sit with yourself to say, would I rather just work with her horse or would I rather reschedule her? And then you could have
Mm-hmm.
answered on like what you preferred out of those options,
Mm-hmm.
which would make you feel a little more in control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because my brain wanted to go to like the loss of income before I leave for vacation to, like it went into like that downward spiral. And then when I just realized like, no, I need to finish with my mother-in-law right now, that gave me the space to then let the other pieces fall into place.
Beautiful. Beautiful use of boundaries to say, I will get back to you, be able to stay focused on what you were focused on. Yay. Some big wins this week or for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you for sharing those. Carol or Shannon, do either of you have anything you want to share about your experience?
Um, I wasn't since I'm relatively isolated here, the only person I really interact with is my husband, and he tends to be the people pleaser, and I tend to be the let me do this myself, you know. I don't know if any of you remember a commercial that was "Mother, I can do it myself," and that was me. That's always me. And then he gets offended, and that's a whole nother story. But what I noticed myself doing is the few times I did get to a barn, anytime I'm interacting with people or not, there's always a thing going on in my head about I don't have anything to say. They don't want to hear this. I don't. They don't seem like they want me to participate in this conversation. Maybe I'm, you know, in their bubble, and they want me out of their bubble. uh, all these negative things about, you know, they
Your
don't want
your
me.
stories about what's
Yeah,
happening. Yeah.
is that I'm interfering. I'm somewhere where nobody wants me to be, or I'm not welcome here, or I've crossed a boundary, but they're just kind of ignoring me, that kind of thing. That's usually what I get into. And I just wanted to say that my so-called job, which I haven't done in a while because of my heart failure back in November, um, is a chaplain in a hospital.
Mm, wow.
And I love it because I don't well, it's not that I don't have to talk. When I do have to talk, then I'm kind of like, I gotta talk. But I like it because we're not necessarily, as you were saying, um, we're just there to hear their story. We're not there to give advice.
Right.
People will tend to they'll either think one thing, that, you know, God sent me and I'm here to fix all their problems, or I don't believe in any of that, so get out of here.
Mm,
And
yeah.
my reaction is always, I'm not here for that. We're not allowed to proselytize. We're not allowed to tell, well, let's put, it's an ethical violation if we do that,
Yeah.
which nobody realizes. And so I like it mainly because I've had 3 experiences that inform my, uh, the way I interact with people now is, when I was in the hospital myself and had a miserable time. Like,
Mm,
who had a good time, but really miserable time, and was all alone, and everyone was too busy to see me, and then they all converged on me at night. So during the day, it was like I needed distraction and couldn't find any. And then at night, I'm like, I'm overwhelmed to get out of my room.
yeah.
and and because of the eating problem that started after that, uh, well, was caused by the surgery I had. So I'm very, very open to, and have no problem with just sitting there and listening to a person complain, or talk about their pain, or are in pain, or, you know, emotional or physical. And especially if they don't want to eat, I'm like, I'm the perfect person for you. uh and I've had really good experiences with certain people, especially those who say I don't believe in anything. And well, you know, and then we get into a conversation because it's like, I don't care. Don't believe it. Think it's stupid. I don't care. You know, I'm agnostic myself, but I usually don't tell them that. Anyway, yes. And then when my mother died in the hospital, we were there, and they kicked me out of the space. It wasn't a room, some third world thing on Long Island that no longer exists, and I wish didn't exist at that point in time. But I didn't know about chaplains then, and not that they had one there, but the nurse kicked me out because I guess I was over emotional and would
Mm,
upset other people.
mm,
And so when somebody is having emotions over someone dying, or someone had died, go at it. I'll just sit here and I'm your silent witness here. And you know, sometimes I'm shocked when someone says, thank you for being there. And all I did was
Be there,
sit
literally,
there
literally be there.
and
Yeah.
just, yeah. And I'm thinking, and the whole time I'm sitting there like, do they really want me to be here? I kind of feel like a voyeur, you know.
So you're
And the
going,
third
you're dealing
thing,
with all your inner voices.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then speaking of veterinary hospitals, I'm a vet tech from way back. I haven't practiced in a long time, but I still have that in me. Um, and so when I was learning about being a chaplain to people in a hospital, I thought this would have been great if I had this in the veterinary practices where someone's having to euthanize a dog or getting bad news or getting results that aren't positive. I haven't been able to sell any veterinarians on that yet. And I kind of quit doing it because I'm not the person to, you know, and that's not my forte, is persuading people try this. Plus, if they said yes, I couldn't do it. I would not be able to be there 20, you know, overnight or during the day or whatever to prove whether or not my thesis is correct. But I did write a thesis, and I did write a chapter in a veterinary animal hospice and palliative care book, which is now in its second edition. And although that didn't get me much play either for that, I just kind of dropped it. Every once in a while, somebody comes up and asks about it, but I've just kind of like, not the time, and I'm not the person to do this. I needed help, and nobody wants, you know, people want to help except when it's time to help, and then, you know. Anyway, I'm going on and on, but that's sort of
What you,
my thing is you know, just starting a conversation. I do not ever want to start a conversation.
so this week was mostly just noticing and affirming that pattern in yourself.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to say it. And yeah, what's the other, something else was popping into my head. Oh well.
What just real quick, what emotions do you feel in that situation where you're there and you're maybe like, I know your story's going that I'm in their bubble, they don't want me here, whatever else. What emotions do you feel in that situation? Can you identify?
Anxiety, fear,
Okay.
inadequacy, incompetent. Yeah.
And it's not really related to anything necessarily that they say or do to you, or are you reading something?
Well, I'm reading, and I'm always, you know, I don't make, as you can probably see already, because I know it's on, I'm on a video. I don't make eye contact, and and the reason why I don't is because if I see the reaction, I'll read into it, and that'll make me forget, or at least go totally silent with, uh-oh, you know, I lost them, or uh-oh, I'm talking too much, or uh-oh.
Okay.
They're mad at me, they're offended, they're looking at me like, yeah. And
So
I've been trying not to do that, but the
here's
best
a
I can
little,
do is look
okay,
at you while you're talking to me, but not while I'm talking.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what I would say might be a fun exercise or could be a useful exercise for you is to actually look for evidence of the opposite.
Huh.
See if you can identify any sign that somebody might want to engage with you, might be thinking about saying, like, right?
Mhm.
Just something else to practice next time you're in one of those situations. You don't have to do or say anything, you don't have to act on it. Just
Yeah.
see if you can look for evidence of the opposite thing than what you think is happening.
And I do that with my horse too. I've
Awesome.
only had him since January. You know, my whole idea was, oh, I'm gonna do all these neat things to bond with her. And of course, most of the time she's just like, go away. Or at least that's my, yeah,
That's
that's
your,
my interpretation. Yeah.
yeah. So the part of the process of like, is it true? That's something we're going to ask a lot in this class through the process is it true? And one way to look for that is to say, is there any evidence that it's not true?
True. That is a totally, yes, that's a totally different
Okay.
thing to, yeah, something to interesting, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Something, and if nothing else, it might help break some of the pattern of the story that's going on internally, right? So baby step. All right. Thank you, Carol, for sharing all of that. Yeah. Shannon, you have anything you want to share from this week?
Journaling, I find very challenging to do. I don't know even how to get started with that. So if you had any suggestions on
that.
That would be helpful.
So yeah, that can be, and
I have journals. I have like 3 or 4 blank ones.
you want to journal, right? You want to do,
I guess.
yeah.
Me too.
One is like, don't beat yourself up for that, right? So I think I'm trying to think if there's even, as you were saying that, I was trying to think if there's even, there may be one other journaling exercise in the course that isn't always what the experiential exercise is going to be. Because I know some people love journaling and other people do find that very challenging. What would be curious is to just enter into a dialogue with yourself without judgment about what is it that you don't, what is it I don't like about journaling, or what's the block, or what's the, right? Just to see if you can even explore what that's about, and don't try to judge it or change it. Like not as in trying to fix it, but just be curious about yourself. Right. So that's one thing I'd say. And don't judge yourself that, it was a journaling exercise, and that right away, like, probably might have put you up a block up for you.
I mean, I did the put yourself, that what was super helpful for me was try to think how your horse would be feeling.
Oh yeah.
Rather than how
Great.
I'm feeling, because I suck at identifying my emotions, but pretty good at his. So
Okay. So were
trying
you
to do it through his lens. Yeah.
Yeah. And were you able, I mean, even without writing them down or making a list, were you able to identify some things he was feeling?
Yeah.
Okay. All
It's like
right.
insecurity, not enoughness.
Not enoughness. Ooh, yeah. Yeah. So another thing to do is, the only way that we can recognize how someone else is feeling is because we know what it feels like to feel those things. So that's empathy. So that might be a great way to start, of like, you may not realize that you're identifying some of your own feelings. And I'm not saying you're projecting, right? That's what's really happening with him, but you can recognize it because you have empathy. And then you could say, when was a time when I felt that, right? You have to write it down. It's just a recognizing that how I'm understanding how my horse is feeling is because I have empathy for that emotion. And why do I have empathy for that emotion? When have I experienced that? Right? Then it doesn't get into journaling. It's just kind of a different way to play around with that exercise.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. And I also want to say, for me, like, out of the 5 modules, this experiential exercise is actually the hardest one to me. Because I think sitting with our emotions, recognize them in the moment, figuring out what else, going on that's causing them, that's really actually pretty complicated. And I've thought about even trying to figure out a different exercise that's more simple about identifying emotions, but I think it is helpful to, like, use what's really happening. And that's what I want these experiential exercises to be in this course, is like, let's deal with something that's happening now and use that as a way to practice, as a way to learn, as a way to explore. I think it's much more impactful. And as Colleen mentioned, like, it actually helped her, deal with some of what was going on a little better or a little differently in real time. And hey, that's a huge win, right? Yeah. And even Shannon, another one, like, you recognizing some of the things he felt, next time you feel that in your real life, you might be like, oh yeah, me and him feeling the same way. Right? So again, just noticing. Colleen, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I'm in the same boat as Shannon. I have multiple journals. In fact, one of my favorites that I really want to use but haven't is Karen Rolfe's Happy Athlete Journal.
Yep.
And it's like, I started it for a training horse once because it was someone else's. I felt more accountable to track it. But when it's for myself, I don't want to. So I was able to recognize that. But where I was going with it was, identifying like a different way of doing it. So like for instance, instead of writing in my actual journal, what I did is I went into a note app that I have on the phone that gives me like bulleted check boxes. And when I made myself sit down, I was like, I'm just gonna, even if it's a one word answer for each of these questions. And then once I started the process, then more came out, or more awareness, evolved from it. And at the same time, at the end of it, it didn't take that long. Like I think, I don't know, like I allowed myself to do it while I sat on a hay wagon in the arena, like that I didn't like make myself sit down at the desk and, write it in the journal. Another one that I've done before, in taking notes or journaling is just like recording my own voice. So finding a different way of tracking it so that I could either hear it or see it and then get a little bit deeper has been helpful. So like, oh gosh, and I'm sorry if I'm going too deep into this, but
That's good.
when I was struggling another time, I remember being on a Zoom with Karen Rolfe, and she was like, maybe today just picking up the pen in the effort that you might write it down. Like that's enough for today. Just that you got the pen out. And then like that's your win. You got the pen. And I was like, but that's not enough. And she was like, who's judging?
The fact that both of you have journals, hey, you've already started, right? You have the journal.
Yeah.
Come on. Carol, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I'm with all of you. I have multiple journals that I start. Like I'm taking a course and they suggest a journal, and I get something to write it in, like maybe a few pages, then another one and a few pages. And the emotion I have behind it is more burnout. I burned myself out writing in seminary because I'm a scientist. I'm not really somebody who, and to come up with the words was just so hard for me that when it was all over, I said, I don't even like answering emails anymore. It's like anything I don't type well. I'm very slow at it. It's frustrating. And then the times when I was depressed and I would write in a journal, and it was all I never really go back to look at them. I shouldn't say never, because I'm just going to say that the few times I have, it's what gets me is that I'm complaining of the same complaints in 1990 as I do in 2000, as I do in, whatever. It's the same old story. And I got burned out writing it. And I tend to go down a rabbit hole whenever I get into journaling, and it just turns into this, mess. Yeah, so it's just I resist it for that reason.
So each of you have your own stories, right?
Yeah.
Related to journaling. Sometimes it might be, I don't have anything important to say, might be my emotions or my experience isn't that important. My clients is, I got to do that, right? Putting priority on theirs. Others might be, I'm not good at this. I don't know how to start, like all the voices.
Yep.
Another exercise that helped me at one time when I was like, totally couldn't journal was someone said, just sit down with a piece of paper and just start writing down whatever words come into your mind. Like, I don't want to be here, ugly, but like just write down, like just start writing down randomly whatever words come into your brain. And then eventually it does start becoming a pattern and a thought and actually sentences. But you can just start by just being like, I'm just going to sit here and write things down. They don't have to have any meaning or anything. Just for 10 minutes, I'm going to write down everything that comes to my mind. And just like this purge, just gets you doing it, right? And do that every day for 10 minutes. And within like 2 or 3 days, I was able to start having more structure to the writing. So those are just some thoughts and ideas. But again, don't beat yourself up about it. Know that there's a lot of people don't like journaling or have, issues with journaling. So yeah. But don't let it be a complete block to like still playing with some of the concepts.
That would be a hard boundary for me, would be to say, all right, 10 minutes is up, stop writing, because usually at that point I'm on to something and then
Then you want to keep going. Yeah.
and it's like cutting me off at that point might be hard. That's the reason why I don't journal, because then I'm sitting there. It's like going into Facebook.
Well, it could be like, okay, I have this 2-hour window. I'm going to make myself sit here for 10 minutes. If I want to keep going after that, I can. If I don't, I don't, right? Like creating a structure around it so that none of it is like a bad experience. It's a win no matter
Mm-hmm.
no matter how you do it. Yeah.
I like picking up the pen. I like that.
Yeah, just picking it up.
Pick up the pen.
That too, and Colleen, you specifically mentioned that you did this, but there's some clarifying questions that I often like to ask myself in terms of like when I'm feeling emotions and I'm trying to figure out my boundary, someone else's boundary, what needs to happen here, is definitely asking what aspect of this situation is mine to own. That also can be what's in my control, what isn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Am I trying to solve somebody else's problem? Or is this really my problem, right? Or is this someone else's emotions, or are they mine? Did the other person actually ask for my help? Do they need my help? If so, was the request specific? If not, can you ask them for a specific answer? Sometimes when people say, I don't really know what I want, I just feel overwhelmed or alone, or I need help. And I'll try to say now, like, take a little while, think about it. And if you can come up with something specific that I can help with, I really would like to do that, but I don't know how to help unless you tell me what you need from me. Or if maybe somebody else is the best person once you figure out what it is that you need. So we can help someone else sometimes too, and not just get caught in this cycle of they're feeling bad. I don't know how to help. I'm trying to help. This isn't working. Like literally try to find the specific of what will help in this situation. And am I the right person to do that? Yeah. And do I actually feel like I can help resolve this situation? And if so, how? So, yeah, I often
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes, please.
One of the things you said earlier that really struck me and is something I'm working on is, I know I can fix that, but do I have the time and energy to fix that?
Right.
Ah.
So that's
Yeah, like, or can I redirect this person? Can I give them another direction? I can't fix it, even though yes, I could. Do I have the time and energy to fix it?
yes. Do I have the time and energy? And am I actually the best person too? Right? Is there somewhere closer to you or someone like, right, could just be time and energy? Yes. Great, 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 great. Right. Just because we can doesn't mean we should or that we have to. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Were there any other, I want to introduce a little bit about week 2 before we like end up for sure. We're only an hour in. We've got, I'm available for 90 minutes for these. So if you guys are okay going for another 30 minutes, or up to 30 minutes. You guys okay? Okay. So anything else that came up, like I've asked you about certain things, but was there anything else that came up related to experiences this week, either with people or your horses or anything related to the material that you want to share?
I think it was recognizing how much I judge myself for wanting to let go of certain things. And really what I mean to give more clarity to that is like, if I could let go of these things that I see as my responsibility, how would that give me energy for things where I know are a true priority that I'm not giving energy to? And I think it goes back to what I was just saying about like, I can do that and I'm good at that, but do I want to do that? And is that taking energy from something that I do see as a true priority in my life?
Yes.
And then the idea of that judgment, right? Like, I have this judgment that I should be able to be the mom and the wife and the business person and the teacher and the mentor that I want to be. But when does Colleen get get put in there for the fuel to be
Yep.
able to be the best at those things. Because that's where I think I get into this place of like judging myself where, well, that's easy. Well, if I was getting paid for that, or if I had some other, well, then I could make an exception, like I could do that. And it wasn't until my husband Scott was like, so if you got paid, you would still do it? Didn't you identify there's not enough time to do this thing that you said?
Right.
And it's like he thinks so black and white about it. Sometimes it frustrates me, but it is like whether it's as simple as like he's the words he uses, a YP or MP. Is this your problem or my problem?
Mm,
Um,
great question.
and then the other thing that going back to where I started is like identifying, just because I can do this doesn't mean that I need to take energy from somewhere else to keep making that happen.
Absolutely. And it's like, it's a train too. Like it's a train that gains momentum. So every time we step in and do something because we can, or we think we can do it easier or better, or it's just easier to do it myself, right? Or, um, as Carol said, let me do it myself, right? Like we have a lot of things about it's just, I just need to, we think it's going to be quicker and faster and easier if we just do it ourselves. But right now, yes. But over
Mhm.
time, right? Then people are going to expect you, one, to do it yourself. Two, they're going to stop taking responsibility for it. So there's some things that like
Yes.
should be co-owned or someone else should have some responsibility for, and that you realize I can't handle this all for, maybe today I can manage it all, but next week and like on an ongoing basis, I'm not going to be able to. So we have to be able to think beyond just this initial moment. And that's where,
Mhm.
honestly, that's really about playing with our emotions, where we realize we're really activated right now. And you're like, I'm just going to do it myself. I'm just going to take care of that. Right. Or it's just going to be easier if I take care of that. That's that immediate, like, boundary violation emotion, probably a boundary violation emotion that's churning that or motivating that decision. So if we can like recognize I'm operating out of that space, whatever that feeling is for you, stop, breathe. Okay. Am I creating more of a problem by taking care of this? And what I really need to do is pick up the phone and ask so-and-so if they could do this today, or say, I need help, right? I don't have time to do this today. I really could use your help. If not you, how do we do this? Does it have to be done? Can it not get done today? Whatever the options are, we start involving others in it instead of taking full ownership that we have to be the one to solve the problem. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the more we behave that way, the more others let us. Believe me, everybody
Mhm.
feels like they don't have enough time in their lives. Everybody feels like there's too much on their plate. So if you're willing to take it off their plate, they're going to let you. Chances are.
Mhm.
You're going to find that rare person who's like, oh my gosh, you work too hard. Stop working too hard. Occasionally you'll find that person too. And if you're in that mode, that's going to be annoying to you. You're going to be like, don't tell me to stop working so hard. If I don't do all this, then everything's going to fall apart, right? And that voice becomes annoyance to us. Like, what are you going to do? You do it then, right? And you know that training someone else to do it, it's going to be harder. Anyway, main thing is recognizing when we're in these emotions that are trying to tell us, our body's trying to tell us, boundary violations, boundary violations. Either you're not having containment boundaries, you're not having protective boundaries, right? Or somebody else isn't managing their boundaries and it's steeping in on us. So main thing about this lesson one, this first module, is learning to recognize when our body is telling us something's got to give here, something's out of balance, and then taking the step back long enough to identify what the emotions are and what might be going on. What's not mine to own that I'm trying to own? Am I in fixing mode? Am I in my hiding mode? Whatever it is. I can't say what it is for everybody else, but yeah. It's all about breaking the patterns that are just like autopilot patterns in our life.
Mhm.
Yeah, Carol.
Um, several on the same lines, only I'm the opposite. I will not want to help and will not offer help but will feel guilty or ashamed for not offering help, but I don't want to. And it's
Mhm.
always, it's always a question in my mind is always, is this me, the authentic me who doesn't want to help and that's okay? Is it the fact that in my history, anytime I tried to help, people told me I wasn't doing things right or good enough, or I don't need your help kind of thing. And so I stopped offering help at that point in time. And how much of it is, you know, the society expects me as a woman to do these things and I refuse.
So let me stop you right there, because those are three very valid questions. And I think what would be helpful is next time you find yourself not wanting to offer help, is
Mhm.
actually sit with those three questions and try to figure out which one of those is true. Because my guess is different scenarios, different ones of those are true.
Yeah.
It's not always the same answer. And so then your response to what should I do is different based on which one of those is actually true in this moment. Right. Now that takes a lot of time and intentional effort to say, I really do want to get to the bottom of this. Right. You may not want to, but then, you know, things aren't going to change. Right. So
Yeah.
that's a choice you're making. But that would be, I love those three questions because you've done enough thinking that you realize these three patterns, right? Or these three scenarios might be behind what's happening. Yeah. And if it is that you're afraid that you've been judged before or told that your help wasn't helpful, right? And you know that that's the fear that's causing it, is then to say, what could I do to maybe mitigate that? Maybe I should ask, what kind of help specifically do you need? Because I want to make sure that if I help you, it really will be helpful for you, right? And then if they tell you specifically what they need, you can then go, I can do that. Or you can go, yeah, I might not be the best person to do that, right? But then you've at least had a conversation. They know that you wanted to help, but you wanted also to be sure that your help was actually going to be helpful. Right?
Yeah, I think I get resistance on that second one.
The asking
Because
how.
anytime I say, nah, no, oh, sure you can. I give it, oh, just take my word for it. And I think I think honestly that number one would be the most, you know, behind most of it. In general, I'm an introvert. I don't put myself out there, and I've just learned how to resist all this more, and then feel guilty because then the back thing is, you never want to help her. You never this, or you are so unfriendly. You're so cold. You're so, you know, all the judgments that were thrown at me that caused the shame. But in reality, I think I just don't want to. And nobody likes hearing that,
Mhm.
especially, you know, my sister-in-law, or my nieces had babies, you know, they're still babies. And when one was being baptized, my sister-in-law was like, "Oh, he's really hot. And feel how hot he is." And she goes, "Touch his feet." And I went, "What?" And I don't want to touch his feet. And she was just like, that to her was unimaginable, that I would not want to touch his feet.
So here with that, like, I love that you're able to say what you don't want to do. Now, the piece to work on then is not carrying the judgment they place on you for it.
Yes,
Right?
yes, yes, yes,
So
yes.
that's the piece that you'll want to work on, right? It's okay to not want to be helpful. Everybody
Yep.
has a right to be whatever we want to be, right? But what you don't want to do then is let their judgment of your choice
Yeah.
affect your self-esteem and your, right? So as we go on the course, we might think of some ways, even language, that you might be able to say to yourself and back to them that just helps you find that recenter again, and life can
Mhm.
go on, right?
Yep.
Maybe, right? So playing with that. But yeah, the owning like the judgment that they're putting on you
Yeah.
is not helpful. Right? Right. Yeah. And if you've
And
already
if they,
decided you're not touching the feet, that's done, right? So it's like
yeah,
they're really
yeah, yeah, it's also the judgment I project they're having on me and not necessarily that they're telling me. Sometimes they are telling me. Sometimes I'm just like, oh, I can see that look.
right. Whereas if you really ask them, who knows what that look might
Yeah,
really be like, well, like you might have just thrown them off so much they're like, I don't even know what to make of that. Like she doesn't want to
yeah,
touch baby's feet. What
yeah,
the heck is that about? Right?
yeah, yeah. And I guess that's the thing. I'm not a question asker. And that's again a long-term thing for me. I grew up on Long Island, if that means anything, outside of New York City, and you just did not ask questions. That's rude. That was none of your business, all the stuff you think about. Think about New Yorkers the same way that people projected onto me. And so I find myself at a loss. I'll usually fix it in my head, or even if it's something like I didn't quite get what you said, I'll rewind the tape, play it through again and go, okay, this must be what they meant. And I'll never say, is this what you meant?
Ah,
Yeah. So that's a whole nother, but yeah, that all kind of ties in together.
that all
'Cause,
ties together for sure.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, I've talked enough.
Yeah, but it gets actually this kind of segues into week 2. So that's kind of beautiful. So week 2 is about the universal language of yes and no, right? And I say it's a universal language because we say it verbally, but our horses tell us through body language, right? Actually, the language of yes and no, very simple language, is what, if you go out into the natural world, it's like what everything is based on. Yes or no. Pretty much you could function in the world mostly just by being able to say yes and no to each other, right? We could get by. We could build relationships based on that. So it's the core of everything, and it's a universal language. And at the end of the day, this, in addition to understanding how we feel, right, and using our own feelings as the basis of what are our boundaries going to be. And the other thing I want to say about that real quick is that why this work like continues on forever is because at this stage, the things I say yes and no to might be different than when I've done some more work on myself. 2 months from now, my yeses and nos might be different for the same situation, right? So yes and no, these are my boundaries, isn't this is my boundaries forever. These are my boundaries right now in this moment. In fact, even a half an hour from now, after I've had a chance to decompress, my answer might be different. My boundary might be different than it is right this minute. So boundaries are constantly, that's why they're designed to be flexible. And that's why relationships are interesting and dynamic, right? So it's not no to something isn't no forever, and yes to something isn't necessarily yes always. So in addition to understanding like that this body, our sensations, how we're feeling is our compass to know whether we're saying yes or no. The other piece of it, so that's the internal relationship with myself, understanding how I'm feeling. Then it's about communicating the boundary to someone else. So saying either in words or in body language, the yes or no. So those are the 2 keys. I'm self-aware enough to know what my boundaries need to be in this moment. And then the other is I'm able to communicate those boundaries to other people. Because if we can't communicate them, it doesn't really do much good. If we don't communicate them, then we're going to sit here feeling like our boundaries are being violated all the time because people are not mind readers. Now, I do think, and people who work with horses, we know this, and Shannon, the fact that you could see how your horse was feeling, right? The more sensitive we get and nuanced, we can often know how somebody else is feeling. But humans are very good at hiding how we're feeling, pretending, not letting anyone see it, whatever, right? Horses are not as good at that. They do hide some things, but generally speaking, they're more honest than we are. And we might honestly go into that like, I'm not showing how I feel. You might not even realize that other people don't see how you're feeling. Or you might not realize that you're hiding it. It's just happening as a survival mechanism. And then we don't understand, like, why couldn't they tell I was uncomfortable? You know, maybe they couldn't, or they were in their own trauma response and not seeing what was right in front of them. So there's lots of things that can be happening there. So we do have to own the responsibility for communicating what our boundaries are, especially if someone doesn't seem to be recognizing them the way that we might like them to. So in the introductory video for week 2, I'm going to talk a lot about the concept of the emotional bank account. Raise your hand if you've heard of that before. It's, I think, a Stephen Covey term. I'll explain it in the video, but it's very related to boundaries, right? And it's about when we're in relationship with someone, what is a deposit in the relationship bank account and what is a withdrawal in the relationship bank account. So that's what the introductory video is going to talk about. And then the supplementary reading for this week is not from my book. It's from a book called Boundaries and Protection from an author named Pixie Lighthorse. Sorry, I always want to call her Lighthouse, but her name is Lighthorse. I think it's really cool. Or at least that's the author name she uses. It's a short reading, but it's really powerful, and it stresses the importance of taking ownership of our own behavior and choices in relationships. She calls that building clean relationships. And that we all probably know the experience of having messy relations where the relationship just feels hard, it feels complicated, it feels messy, it feels unclean. So her reading is about how do we help make those feel more clean, and it is about communicating. And if even the thought of communicating gives you like heart palpitations right now, that's okay, right? It's really hard for a lot of us, but we have to understand first the theoretical importance of why communicating about our boundaries, and about not just about our boundaries, but about the fact that even though we're struggling to be good with boundaries and communicating and all that, the relationship is still important to me. And that's the thing we don't want to risk happening, is that because we're not navigating the boundaries well, the relationship ends up getting trashed or damaged, or like, we walk away from it when we didn't really want to. So if it's a relationship we care about, those are the relationships where we want to start working on our boundaries and doing better with our boundaries. If it's a relationship we don't care about, we can walk away from it, right? It doesn't really matter. So this work that we're doing is for the relationships that do matter to us. We do want to have some relationships in our lives, or some relationships we have to have in our lives, whether we want to or not, whether they're work related or family. So how can we figure out what's the best way to navigate what we have to in this relationship so that we're both okay, right? So clean relations. And yes, that the reading is particularly talks about how to work on clean relations when we're feeling hurt or resentful about someone else, how someone else has behaved or treated us, and that we actually do have a responsibility to let them know that what they've done didn't feel good to us. That's about honoring our own boundaries. If we don't speak up for ourselves, then we can't really be resentful that someone is treating us a certain way, because they may not realize it, right? They have their own stories going on in their heads about how a relationship or how exchange went that may be completely different than how we experienced it. All right, so clean relations. So this is another thing I wanted to say. I don't talk about this in the module, but it's related. So a lot of the time when we're going through this realization about relationships and which ones are really worth having in our lives and which ones aren't, and we're not good yet at identifying how we feel or owning our responsibility in boundary setting, how to communicate what's ours to own, we sometimes do step back from a lot of these relationships. Sometimes we end them completely. Sometimes we just step way back and we end up feeling isolated or lonely or alone. Now, sometimes we need that time alone, right? We need to step back. But the point is, if we're stepping back, let's use that time wisely to get a better, more real picture of ourselves, understand what we need to work on, and prepare ourselves to come back out and engage in the relationship again in a healthier way. It's not I'm going to stay out of this forever. Again, unless it's a relationship that we deem a very toxic marriage that I was in for 17 years, I needed to just end that relationship and have it be a clean break. I didn't need that one in my life anymore. So there are times when there's some that we need to just end, but there's a lot of them that if we can just take some step back and regroup, get a little better sense of what's healthy for ourselves, then we can like re-engage more strategically. But yeah, a lot of times when we feel really isolated or alone and kind of have a victim mentality about that, we're actually the ones that we have to recognize we're the ones that chose to step back. And it's really important to get clear with ourselves about whether that choice to step back and for how long is healthy, is because we're trying to get healthy, or if it's kind of an avoidance tactic, or even out of anger, or I don't want to say revenge, right? We can have a lot of those feelings as well, that we feel like it's the other person's fault. So, or that we just don't have the courage to engage in the uncomfortable conversations that probably need to happen. So that's just kind of a background on why some of this is important. As always, there's going to be an experiential this week. It's not journaling in the same way, right? It's not as much a full out journaling exercise. There always is some, I think, writing things down, but you can do that or you can take mental notes. And this week, there actually is going to be a horse behavior video. It's a really cool one. And again, part of the fun of the horse behavior videos is that whole, Shannon, what you talked about with being, feeling empathy toward what your horse is feeling. Sometimes it's so easy for us to feel that when we're watching horses, and they're so pure and clean. And this video is a really cool little one where you can really feel what's going on with each of the horses. So there'll be that we end on, but don't jump ahead to that. Do the other things first, and then like treat yourself as a reward to the horse behavior video at the end. So once again, I just open it to any question and answer or final final thoughts or reflections from this week. Are you guys enjoying any parts of this course, or does this just feel really hard?
No, it's good.
You're enjoying some of it?
Good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent. All right. Well, and the Facebook book group's been pretty quiet, but don't forget that that's there. If you,
Yeah, I'm very bad at that.
That's okay. I don't want it to feel like extra pressure, but just don't forget that it's there if you want to have a touch in or tell a story or share a picture or even just a meme or just say, I don't know, whatever. Feel free to use that if you want to, but don't feel like that's an added pressure that you have to do. You're allowed to say no to that too.
They tend to.
All right. Well, excellent. It's great to see you all. And I know Shayla has a lot going on in her life this week too. So she probably just decided she made a strategic boundary that she needed to use this time for something else today. And I know Mary's going to watch it back, but hopefully all 6 of us with me will be on next week. So have fun, enjoy the classroom, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.